Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Healing Outside the Box. I'm Gene Tiberio, and I'm a nutritionist and a wellness coach. Here comes episode 262, which I'm calling, How Reliable Are Nutrition Studies? If there is conflicting information about food and diets on the news or social media, which one is fake news and which one is reliable? Or more specifically, can you use your intuition with a few tips to figure it out for yourself? But first, I want to follow up on my previous episode, which was on dietary recommendations to slow down climate change. I just wanted to add a few things. I'll give you a link on the show notes for this episode to a webcast called Menus of Change. And I encourage you also to check out your own sources on the World Wide Web to maybe see what you can do with your knife and fork to combat climate change. Also, I forgot to mention again that there's a great documentary called The Need to Grow. It's one of my favorite documentaries on the subject of how we can do better to feed the planet with renewable energy. I also forgot to mention that I'm very saddened about something, ladies and gentlemen, and it's difficult for me to talk about this because my emotions are close to the surface when it comes to this topic. And here's what it is. Due to global warming, lobsters off the coast of New England are walking to Canada. Well, they may be crawling to Canada, but either way, they've got nothing else to do in plenty of time. So they're crossing the border, slow but sure, and ending up off the coast of Newfoundland. Now, I live only a long block from the ocean, so it's personal. There's lobster traps everywhere around where I live, and it's possible to get a lobster that was pulled up this morning. So I'm very sad that they're crawling north because apparently the water off the New England coast is too warm for them, which means we will all have to import our lobsters from the Canadians, and we all know how they can be. We need to do something to stop them from crossing the border into Canada and leaving us here with heavy hearts and empty lobster traps. And since the Republicans are still making snowballs indoors to prove that global warming is a hoax, we're going to have to build a wall to keep the lobsters from leaving our precious New England shores. Let's see. We can't use wood because it's, well, the ocean, but we can use an iron fence that doesn't have to be too high because, after all, lobsters can't jump, even with 6 legs, and the iron fence doesn't have to be out too deep in the ocean because they appear to hang closer to the shore. So what we need, ladies and gentlemen, is an iron curtain to keep the lobsters from leaving. If anyone out there has suggestions about how we can keep the lobsters here, feel free to leave it in the comments section or email me on my website page, which is healingoutsidethebox.com. Because I can't single-handedly solve this lobster immigration problem, I am literally losing sleep trying to figure out ways to bribe the lobsters back to Massachusetts. Or we could just stop global warming. Okay, back to the episode for today, which is how reliable are nutrition studies? Whether you get your diet and nutrition information from the 6 o'clock news or Facebook, Dr. Oz, or the NIH, there is one thing you can rely on, and it's this. Information and even recommendations will change or evolve over time. And it's quite reasonable to assume that 2 experts may have 2 differing opinions. There are published studies coming out all the time, and some contradictions inevitably come up. Also, not all studies are equal in terms of their reliability. We humans are complex animals, and there are lots of variables that sometimes cannot be controlled. And to make matters more confusing, the summing up of what a study is measuring can be oversimplified to the point of being incorrect. It could be interpreted differently depending on if you're listening to the 6 o'clock news, or Dr. Oz, or Kim Kardashian, or the NIH. Here's an example. An antioxidant called resveratrol, which was found in some studies to lower the risk of cardiovascular disease, is abundant in the skins of red and black grapes. On the 6 o'clock news, that became, drink red wine to avoid heart attacks. In addition to ignoring the fact that resveratrol is also abundant in blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, peanuts, and pistachios, they ignored the fact that drinking wine will make your liver work harder to metabolize the alcohol. And this part is important. They neglected to mention that 80 million Americans now suffer with non-alcoholic liver disease. It's apparently a new epidemic. So adding daily wine consumption to our liver's workload is less than ideal. And that's because it's the liver's job to detoxify and metabolize alcohol, in addition to the herbicides, preservatives, and other chemicals that are contained in food. Writers sometimes may want to grab attention with a headline that is controversial but not completely true. Or the writer might be stating an assumption based on one small study or a few people's testimony. Or the knowledge of a specific topic may just have evolved. New foods get invented. Specific dietary recommendations can change over time when new information comes in. So when we know better, we recommend better. Okay, so how do we decide whether or not a diet study or news feed is reliable? Here are some tips on how to judge nutrition in the news. Number 1, put your common sense hat on. Let's say it together, folks. If it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. My favorite example of this is, now this is a direct quote, "Lose weight while you sleep." Now, I've been doing a lot of sleeping in my lifetime, and so have you, I imagine. And I can tell you right here and now that, aside from the weight of what is currently in your bladder, that ain't gonna happen. Number 2, another thing to ask yourself is, did this information originally come from a single study or a study with a small number of participants? A lot of experts will tell you that a single study on one particular previously unknown topic should not be enough to change your diet or lifestyle. The more reliable articles will give you some history about similar studies and what they have shown, rather than relying on only one source. These articles will tell you about previous studies in the abstract or maybe discussion sections. Metadata articles will talk about a combination of studies linked together in the one article. This can be helpful because they may say something like, 90% of the studies on this topic show blah blah blah. Number 3, another thing to consider is whether or not a specific claim fits into the general knowledge on that topic. Let's say you see a claim that says, drinking apple cider vinegar will help you to lose weight. Now, when you've seen legitimate, reliable articles about weight loss in the past, the overall picture usually mentions eating fewer calories and or moving more. The one exception to that would be the keto diets, but keto diets make you lose weight by putting you in a state of ketosis. That stresses your body, and it is ultimately unsustainable. So long-term ketosis doesn't work if you want a long-term life. Now, vinegar is just a solution containing acetic acid. There's no connection to any mechanism that will result in weight loss. Okay, number 4. Was the study done on animals or humans? I have had experience working with both rats and people in my nutrition work, and I mean this only in the nicest possible way, but rats are easier to work with. Or should I say, the results are more accurate because you can weigh the food going in and weigh the food coming out. Then you subtract the difference and get a very accurate picture of how much protein, carbohydrates, and fat the rat had eaten. Another advantage to the rats is that scientists can kill them and autopsy them after the study is complete. Many important studies have been carried out by animals, but usually to best understand how food and nutrients interact in our bodies, theories about food and health should always be tested on people eventually. The exceptions might be studies about possible toxicity or pharmacological benefits or adverse reactions with chemicals or ingredients. If you don't see that any animal studies were done, that might signal a problem with the nutrition claims about the product. When a product or ingredient is introduced, usually the rat studies come first, then the human studies. Studies that are only done on humans may ignore the fact that sometimes there are complicating psychological or physiological factors to be considered. I ran into this situation when I was a dietitian and involved in a human study testing a med called Lopid to lower cholesterol. The study was paid for by Park Davis, who was putting out Lopid and wanted it to be approved by the FDA. The study design was great. We had all the participants going for 8 weeks on diet alone, using the Heart Association diet, and then they were put on either Lopid or the placebo for several months. We asked them for an entire week to write down every single thing they ate and drank. Almost everyone came in very excited to see us, showed us the sheets. The nurse and I were so surprised at how well they were doing on diet alone. They looked forward to seeing us, and we all chatted and exchanged stories and so forth. So we got to be friendly with the participants since we were seeing them a lot, and they enjoyed interacting with us. And lo and behold, 75% of them significantly lowered their cholesterol with diet alone, meaning they might not need the drug. But once again, Park Davis, the maker of the drug, was paying for the study. So once again, we have another complicating factor. The company paying for this study did not want people to improve their cholesterol with diet alone, and they were booted from the study. The nurse and I started calling this the TLC factor. Also, we dietitians just knew to consider the fact that writing everything down, honestly, is more difficult for people who have trouble controlling either what they eat or drink. And in general, people who are writing it down will eat better that week. This is not a criticism of them in particular, because we all want to present ourselves as being disciplined and successful at what we do. We are, after all, human that way. So when nutrition studies ask humans to write down everything they eat, they will write down less than what they actually did eat. Sometimes the heavier the person is, the less honest the person is. The same is true for alcoholics who record what they drank on their 7-day diet intake sheets. For example, an alcoholic might write down that they drank 2 12-ounce beers or 2 6-ounce glasses of wine. Never more and never less. Non-alcoholics will just accurately write down what they drank. There is just no getting around human nature that way. But you can balance those studies with population studies, which gives you a different take on eating habits. Now, number 5. How was the information recorded and assessed? A large study with thousands of participants and a commitment to record data will have more merit than the opposite conditions. A more reliable study will tell you how they collected their data and usually have tables or graphs so you can see the actual data points. Number 6. Last but not least, you may want to look at what type of study it is. The type of study that is used could depend on whether or not it's a rat study, a nutrient or drug study, a population study, or a study simply about the effect of independent variable A on dependent variable B. So study types fall into different categories, including cohort studies, which can either look back over time or be prospective forward over time. There are randomized control studies, usually with a placebo, and neither the diet office or the participant knows who's getting it. Meta-analysis, case control studies, and animal studies. I'll give you an example of these. Okay, animal studies. For this, I'll give you an example of the study that I was involved in myself. I was working in the nutrition pathology lab at MIT, and I was given 360 baby rats from the Charles River rat breeders. And yes, that was the actual name of the company. And we were assigned the task of seeing if large doses of an additive would cause cancer. So you definitely want to test the rats first. We were testing for the enzyme lactase to be added to food to show whether or not it is safe for human consumption when added to milk or other dairy. Again, we were primarily looking for tumors, but full autopsies were done on all the rats when we killed them. Another reason you may not want to work on humans first. We had a control group in 5 different doses of this lactase enzyme. We added the powder to the food, which we had to make by hand. Then we put the rats into 6 equal groups and assigned each of them either a dose or control. This doesn't have to be a blind study because, after all, they're rats. It technically is harder to do a dose study on people because they could tell if the food contained a large dose of a substance that makes the food taste different. People won't eat as much if the food tastes lousy, but rats don't care and ate the high-dose food anyway because they're rats. We did also weigh all of the rats a few times a week and had to time everything perfectly. The results were fine, by the way, and lactate was put into milk. The next type of study is more complicated because it involves complicating factors, and that's a nutrient or drug study. This type of study will completely depend on the hypothesis that the scientist is looking to address. An example of this might be to determine the minimum blood level of vitamin B12 that is necessary to avoid deficiency symptoms. This needs to eventually be done in people in order to get the most accurate outcome, versus doing it with rats and multiplying the weight factor. But in addition, B12 is complicated because it requires activation in our stomach. And activation depends on age, acidity of the stomach, chronic illness, etc. A nutrient study like this requires methodology, which also has to be ethical. You can't give a person a deficiency of vitamin B12, and you need a large number of participants to avoid sampling error. In a case like this, you would need to combine studies and include a population or cohort study. So what is a population or cohort study? This can be used either with retrospective data from the past or prospective data to be designed into the future. One of the most comprehensive prospective cohort studies was called the China Study. It was conducted by T. Colin Campbell from Cornell. His study involved 6,500 participants, and he watched them over several years. He conducted exams, diet histories, blood work. They worked in 65 different counties in China and measured over 367 variables. It took years and a small army of people, but they collected a ton of data. Back here in the United States, we do something smaller, but we do it every year, and it's called the National Haines Study. It studies 10,000 Americans every year and includes physical exams, blood work, and detailed diet histories. Then the results and recommendations are published. There may be articles that talk about a meta-analysis. The NIH likes to do this, and I generally look at their article first to give me an idea what they are studying and, in general, what they found. And they will give you percentages in terms of how many studies show that A significantly affected B. They will not give you any specifics about what you should eat or otherwise change in your health habits. Okay, overall, if a study or article you're looking at involves at least a cohort study or double-blind human intervention study, it should be a pretty good bet. The more studies that support the initial claim, the better. But if you have any questions, either in general or about a specific claim or study, feel free to contact me on my contact page, which is on my website called Healing Outside the Box. That's all I have for you today. Be well and stay tuned next week for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.